I'm Peter Weitzman. I'm really excited about presenting to you today about side hustles. And that's because I really am a true believer that they help people get from getting by to getting ahead. So let's talk about what we've got here. And the first thing I want to do here is just a quick disclaimer. I'm going to be talking about some companies, some products, maybe even some prices and some numbers. And generally, I just want to remind you that hopefully it's all correct. Please do your own due diligence, check, verify. I'm not recommending anything or endorsing anything. So just kind of keep in mind that these are ideas for you to take away and apply to yourself. So the first thing I want to do here is just cover our agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and define what side hustles are, explain why side hustles are so powerful. I want to show you a little bit of just a smattering of what's available in the side hustle world. I want to give you some criteria that might help you select the perfect side hustle. I want to show you the impacts of doing side hustles over a long period of time. I want to give you some tips on how I think you can add side hustles to your repertoire. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is a side hustle? I think a lot of people wonder this, and really, depending on your age and your vintage, to me, the word that resonates is moonlighting. So a lot of people think about a side hustle as doing something, having a job, having activity, a business, or whatever, a project outside of your normal working hours. And what I have here is a motorcycle with a sidecar, because I think this really captures how to think of it. So for most of us, we have a core financial strategy, and that is working our job, getting an income, making money, putting money towards retirement, paying our debts, paying our bills, and that's all done through our job. But what we can do in many cases is add on a sidecar to that core strategy, our side hustle, and have something else that starts generating income. And the point of adding that sidecar really is income. Give us a little breakaway room financially. And so the reality is that sidecar can be of any different size. It can really be different for people, and anyone can do it. So I'm going to talk about that. But I absolutely have a side hustle. So I am talking about this because I'm passionate about it. And my side hustle is YouTube. My sidecar is YouTube. So who are side hustles for? I wanted to share this with you. This is how I think about us ordering our finances. I feel like there are a lot of buckets that we want to fill, and we fill them generally in order. First of all, we got to take care of our bills, expenses, all of the day-to-day things. We got to put food on the table. And then if there's money left over, we start paying off debts maybe more aggressively. Then we really focus on savings and getting our savings up, maybe trying to take care of our retirement. And if there's money left over, we put that in our dream bucket. We pursue the things that we want to do. Now, I will say that most people, look at this number, 78% of people are living paycheck to paycheck, meaning that the money coming in is just enough to cover their expenses. And so side hustles are really great for people right in the space, right? The people that are just getting by and not being able to fill some of those other buckets. Because look at what we can do is we can get ahead in some of these other things and maybe even pursue some of our dreams as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So why do we want to make side hustles part of the financial conversation? The big reason is that people are already utilizing side hustles in a really big way. In fact, I will show you some stats that people are just crushing it on side hustles out there. The other thing is, having been in the financial planning industry for over a decade, I really have noticed that the industry avoids having the side hustle conversation. There really isn't good strategies. There's nothing really formal about it. We don't really leverage it in many ways. And the real danger there is that, man, side hustles can change lives. So I'm going to give you some examples. First of all, let me just explain what I have seen as the financial industry's typical budget process. So just stressed out about money. Maybe they're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe they're not getting by. What you do in that situation, you just naturally will go to your expenses and you'll cut out the things that you can cut out, just cut out the fat. But then if you're still stressed, this is where people start to reach out to the financial professional world and say, hey, I need some help. They come to people like me, or financial coaches or counselors or advisors. And what do we do? So the first thing I usually do when people say, hey, I'm stressed about my cash flow, is I grab a budget worksheet, we look at their expenses, and then we look for places to cut costs. So if you look at this typical process here, they've cut costs, they've been stressed, they go to a professional, they try to cut costs. It's like always going back to this. And oftentimes by the time a financial professional comes into play, the costs have already been really addressed. And in fact, sometimes there can be no meat left on the bone. It can actually be really difficult to find additional cost cutting. So one of the questions is, why do we focus so much on cost cutting? Why, for me as a professional, why have I gone to that? Why is that my go-to strategy in most cases? I have a few theories about this, but one, I have this Sallie Mae budget worksheet that I have up here. It's a free PDF online. You can certainly use it. I've used it a lot. It's really actually a very good one, but here's a good example of why I think we focus on it. I've circled here in green the area that has to do with income. And then in red is all of the items that have to do with expenses. And when you look at this, 90% of the budget worksheet is identifying expenses. So I think it's really easy for us to say, hey, look at all these line items of expenses. Let's go through and evaluate each one. And there's really only one, maybe two lines for incomes. We look at that and sometimes we gloss over and say, hey, maybe we can't do anything. It's totally inelastic, but there's all this content that we can look at from the expense side. The other thing is I truly believe we're all practitioners in cost cutting. If you've ever earned money and spent money, you've gotten your credit card bill, your invoices, you've looked at your wallet, whatever it is. We've all gone through the process of, can I spend less on this? Is that something I can do without? Can I get this cheaper? We've all gone through the process. So it's really easy to convey that and share that because we are practitioners on it. The other problem is income related items, income related topics are really scattered. They vary a ton. Sometimes the information is really new. Sometimes it's very old. Sometimes it's outdated. It's really hard to pull in a cohesive income discussion. And so it's really easy to talk about expenses, and it can be really confusing or laborious for us to bring in income related topics. That's why I think we just naturally, and certainly for me, I just naturally gravitate to reviewing expenses. Now, we can always focus on cost cutting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to put that into your strategy. But what are the problems of focusing almost exclusively sometimes on cost cutting? For one thing, it's painful. Even if people have overspent, as you come in, we're looking at the expenses. My assumption is maybe you're eating out too much, you're buying too much gourmet coffee or whatever it is. Even if you couldn't afford it in the first place, if I ask you to give it up, it is painful. It is something that you had that you are giving up, and it's painful to split with that, even if you couldn't afford it. The affordability is almost irrelevant. But if you've ever had something and had it taken away, you've experienced that. The other problem with cost cutting is that it has limited upside. So think of it like a bank account. So let's say your bank account has $100 and I tell you, hey, no spending. How much are you going to have in your bank account? $100, right? If you make $1,000 a month and I cut all of your expenses out, I say, hey, no rent, no food out. We're going to just live minimalist. How much can we hope to have at the end of the month? $1,000, right? The value of cost cutting is capped by how much money you're bringing in. And so there's a limit to how much value we can create. And the last thing is it's really hard to sustain. So I know that when people feel the pressure, myself included, you can go in and say, hey, I'm getting rid of cable, I'm getting rid of my cell phone or whatever. I'm going to get a different apartment or downsize to a smaller car. A lot of those things you can be motivated to do in the short term, but to sustain that, to endure it for the long term can be really painful. Like never going to eat out can be one of those things where you just say, hey, I want to go out and eat out once in a while. All of those things make the cost cutting process tough to sustain, tough to endure. So what I really suggest here, or my strategy is make budget reviews about low-hanging fruit. And what I mean by that, and I think we all have an idea about that, is that I want to look at the costs that are really easy to cut out of your spending when we start on this process. Hey, are you able to have a cheaper cable package? Is that an easy change for you? Are you comfortable eating out less or finding a cheaper grocery store, right? What are the easy things for you that don't really impact your lifestyle that you can change right away, that we can make those modifications? Because those things I think we can put in on day one without a lot of effort and they'll make a pretty big impact. But there's a couple of red flags that I will identify that I think should be good signals for you to stop cost cutting. And the first one is when you hit the point of diminishing returns. And what I mean by this is, are you putting in a lot of effort to save a little money? And my example on this is couponing. I've seen people spend hours and hours couponing to save themselves a few dollars on their grocery bill. A threshold I use is if you're spending more time than minimum wage pays, if you're spending an hour doing something to save a couple of bucks, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm saying I think we might be able to deploy your time a little bit better. The other thing that I run into in a practical way a lot of times is what I call the non-negotiables. A lot of times I'll be working with people and I say, hey, listen, you really can't afford cable. And they'll come back and say, listen, we're not getting rid of cable. It's our only family entertainment. We don't go out to movies. We don't go on vacation. The only thing we have is really like the family comes together and watches a movie, or we have our shows or whatever. And so when you get to those points where you're hitting the non-negotiables, I think that's a good sign that you cut out the easy stuff. And now you're at the stuff that's going to be really painful, maybe more painful than the cost of the actual product or service. So when these red flags come up, this is where I think you need to pivot to the income side of the discussion. So let's look at the income tree. And there are a number of things that I think the financial services industry rush to, and I think we need to reorder this. So the first thing that I think a lot of people talk about is raises. Can you work more at work? Can you gun for that promotion? Can you ask for a raise? All those things are great, but I think they're out of our control in many cases. And sometimes they happen without us really focusing on them. So that's sometimes out of our control. And so I wouldn't necessarily make that a priority. The other thing is what I call one-time income. So a lot of times we say, hey, can you have a garage sale? What about putting stuff on eBay or Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or whatever? And that's all well and good too. I'm totally for it. But what that does is it brings in income once. And often the amount of time that we spend doing that doesn't really generate enough income to compensate for our time. So what I actually think is the low hanging fruit on the income side are side hustles. And so we will get into that more, but I think there's a couple advantages of side hustles. I think you can start them right away. Everyone has access, especially if you have a computer or a smartphone. And it's not only just bringing in income one time, but it's bringing in income as long as you want to do it. It can be month after month, week after week, whatever it is. So I think it solves the problem of being better than one-time income and also a lot less effort than some of the other options. Let me share a true story. So I have a participant that I've worked with over the last few years. Her name's Becky, and she came into my program because she was stressed out about money and she had cut costs as much as she thought she could do. And she came in looking for professional help and said, hey, what can I do? I'm at my wit's end. And so the first thing I thought of was like, let's take a look at your spending. Let me get a handle on it. And the nice thing is she was doing everything on a debit card. So we looked at the last 90 days of spending on her statements. And I'll be honest, I was really surprised. I went in expecting that, hey, there's some areas that we can cut. She didn't make a ton of money and she didn't have a ton of expenses, but she was just barely getting by. In fact, the only fluff she had in her budget was a $7 bottle of wine once a week that she would buy so that she could hang out in the evening with her girlfriend. And the thing about this was that it's really hard to talk about cutting costs when really the only fat in the budget is a $7 a week luxury item. Now, I will say we continue the conversation. We switched over to the income side of things. And one of the things that I found out is that she really loved dogs. She was actually a dog lover and had several dogs in years past. And so what we did was we explored that. And she actually downloaded, I believe it was the WAG app, and actually started picking up dog walking jobs after work during the weekends and started generating $200 a month in extra cash flow. On top of that, where Becky lives, the spring breaks for schools are staggered. So they span a 3-week period. So because she already had dog equipment and kennels and stuff like that, she's able to board dogs during those 3 weeks of spring break weeks. And she actually was able to bring in another $2,000 during the spring break period. So what I'm trying to point out here is instead of us trying to figure out how she can cut out maybe the one thing that she enjoys and figure out how to add $7 a week back to her budget, by doing this, by looking at opportunities to pick up things that she enjoyed, she was able to generate $400 in additional cash flow, a big difference than say $28 a month in savings, right? So this is why it's really powerful. So I want to also share with you a couple of numbers that I think are really relevant to side hustles. First of all, on the income side, how much money can side hustles bring in? There's something I want to call the modal amount of income. So when people are surveyed on how much money they're bringing in from the side hustle, this is the most frequently reported number. It's $200 a month. And this resonates with me because my wife actually side hustles. She's a teacher, but she tutors for 1 hour a week after school, and she gets paid $50 a week. $50 times 4 weeks is $200. So this one was bang on for me. So someone who has a kind of a very limited side hustle can bring in about $200 a month. Now, the other one is an average monthly income. So if you think about the people who are really embracing side hustles, it's probably not just an hour a week. It might be all a Saturday. It might be a couple hours every day. But the average amount of side hustle income reported is $580 a month, which I actually think was more than I was expecting. Now, having that additional income does something that I call multiplying the discretionary. And what I mean by discretionary income is for most of us, that's the only part of our income that really matters. When you give a kid $20 for allowance, how much of that can they spend? $20, right? They don't have bills. They don't have a mortgage to pay. All that money you gave them was discretionary money. And so we're kind of like that. In fact, most of our money is spoken for. I think in most cases, it goes to your bills, your mortgage, your car payment. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics here did a survey and they saw that $74,664 was the average household income. And they looked at all of the spending that average household does. And they calculated roughly that $258 per paycheck was the discretionary amount. Now, this doesn't include things like debt payments or loans and some of those other things and some like luxury items like gourmet coffee or whatever it might be. So I think this might even be a little high, but think about this. For the household that makes around $75,000, about $250 per paycheck is really all they have to spend in what I call freedom money, right? Kind of their play money. Now, if you have a side hustle, let's say you just bring in the modal amount of income, $200 a month, that's equivalent to about $92 per paycheck every other week. That's a 35% increase in the amount of discretionary money, the amount of free money that you actually have. And if you have an average side hustle, which would be $268 per paycheck, that's more than doubling the amount of freedom money that you have. Small side hustle can really make a big difference in the amount of money that you have to really play with. Now, let me put it another way. You go to work, you have your regular day job, and you bust your hump and you're working all month anyway for that discretionary income, for that freedom money above and beyond all of your needs. If you were to increase that just a little bit, like 10%, you could double potentially your freedom money, that discretionary income. So what I'm saying here is that if you raise the amount of output that you produce just by a little bit, the amount of actual free cash that you have can double, triple. It's really limitless. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. There are definitely some other benefits other than just the financial benefits of having a side hustle. First of all, you don't have to move jobs. So a lot of people look for professional satisfaction by finding their ideal career, chasing their dreams, chasing their passion. And a lot of people always look at moving jobs, but it's really hard to apply. It's a big commitment. If it's not the right job, then have you made the wrong choice? So you don't have to move that job. Instead, now maybe you can find a side hustle that really fits with something that you're really passionate about. So you can get that fulfillment without changing your job. The other thing is multiple streams of income. This is a buzzword right now because if you have a job and you get laid off or your hours get cut or whatever it might be, all your eggs are in one basket. But if you have a different stream of income, if something gets cut back or there's an unexpected job loss, you won't necessarily lose all your income. So that's also pretty powerful. The other thing I say is it's a zero-sum game. It's like a light switch. So my wife, early on, she used to teach summer school. So what was the benefit of teaching summer school? She would bring in some money. The other benefit was she wasn't at the mall spending money. So when you're spending your time earning money, you aren't usually spending your time spending money. It's very easy to get tempted and take that time that you're not doing something and look for something to do. And it's really nice because the side hustle not only will bring in more income, but it might help control the expenses too. And then there's the social, emotional, and mental value of doing side hustles. 26% of people who do side hustles say it's completely unrelated to their primary job. It might be because that they want social interaction that they're not getting at their job. It might be because they want to work outdoors, something that they can't get at their job. It might just be with people that are aligned with their values and share similar hobbies and lives and experiences. And the other thing is unlimited upside. So just because a side hustle might pay you an hourly salary, it might be starting a business, whatever it is, I don't know that we will ever have a clear understanding of what all of the value is, whether it's mental, emotional, spiritual, or financial. I think we really can't know what people will get out of it in the long run. The other big advantage here is a mindset shift. And this is what I want to talk about because I think it's important to know that when I think of the financial ladder and people going from struggling to stable, to surplus, to prosperity and generosity, there's a really important threshold. If we look at bad times and paycheck to paycheck living, people are getting by, people are stressed, people are maybe worried about their car breaking down next month and what that will do to their finances. If you can move from those bottom two rungs, those two red rungs, up to stable, if you can just move from one level, I think that's a huge shift mentally. If you can get from just getting by to getting ahead a little bit, even if it's a little, right? Even if there's a little extra cash every month, I think that's a hugely different mental place to be. It moves you out of the mentality of scarcity into the mentality of abundance. Now, I'm not saying that it will give you all of the mental headspace and freedom that you have ever envisioned, but there's a big difference. I think there's a huge difference in that small step, if that makes sense. So the more people we can get from paycheck to paycheck living, the more we can get that 78% of America from just scraping by into the point where they're stable, maybe putting a few bucks away. I think that they will feel a huge mental relief on that. And that's one reason that I think everyone in America really is doing a side hustle. In fact, 37% of people are doing it. And depending on how you measure side hustles, I've seen some numbers saying up to 80% of Americans qualify as doing something outside of their primary job. So it's really interesting. Now, even in certain demographics, it's really popular. In fact, the majority of millennials have a side hustle of some sort. But what I'm also maybe more surprised about is if you look at baby boomers, people who are either near retirement or going into retirement, 24% of those people have a side hustle as well. Maybe you're excited about it. Maybe say, hey, this is something I want to consider. I think the first practical step is how do you choose a side hustle? Because the amount of side hustles out there is really broad. And on top of that, there are new side hustles being invented all the time by technology. So let me tell you how I think of side hustles. First of all, I think that side hustles can be broken up into really three big categories. One, what I call exchanging time for money is one category. The other one I call variable compensation. And the third one I call income building. So with these three, I call them the spectrum of side hustles. And so time for money just means I'm exchanging my time for your money. You're just paying me for my input. This is very much like Uber. If you go drive Uber, you'll probably make about $14 an hour is what I've heard on average. If you go bartend, you'll probably make a certain amount of money per hour that you put in. Babysitting is very much a time for money. A family might say, hey, I'll pay you $20 an hour as long as we're gone. So that's very clear. It's just your time for money. Variable compensation is a little bit different in that it's often correlated by how much time you put in to how much value and money you'll get out, but it's not perfect and it's not guaranteed. The really common one for me is a real estate agent. If you're a real estate agent, you can actually make good money for your time, but it's also not a guarantee that your client buys a house or sells a house. It's not a guarantee that it's going to take a week to find a house. It might take months. And so this is a little bit of a riskier proposition because you don't necessarily put in your time and get paid at the end of the week. And then on the far end, I call this income building. And this is something of a little bit of a holy grail of side hustles. And it's by far the toughest one to crack. So what I call income building, and this can be where you're putting in your time really for building a business that will hopefully generate income even as you put in less effort in the long run. So for example, let's say you're a software developer and you build an app for the App Store. You may spend a few months building an app, putting in the App Store, investing your own time, your own money, and not getting paid. And maybe the downloads are slow. But maybe in a few months or a few years, the income starts coming in, or for some reason it gets popular. So these are the higher risk ones, and they're also really often unlikely to succeed. But if you get them right, and if the winds favor you, you can do really well on these. Now, I showed you 78% of America gets by paycheck to paycheck living. And so what I would say is that most of those people should really only look at the time for money, maybe a little bit in the variable compensation. But for the people who are trying to plug an income gap right now, I think they need to stay in the space of time for money. We need to try to figure out how to make your budget work right now, which means I need you to put in some effort now and get paid next week. We need that money coming in right away. We need the guaranteed income. Now, if you are stable in your finances, you're making ends meet, your budget works, maybe you're saving a little, this is where I think you have a little more freedom to say, hey, what do I really want to do? Do I want to be a realtor? Do I want to sell something on Etsy? Do I want to become an investor in real estate? That might give you some other options here, because the real problem here is these can take a long time to develop. And so you have to be in a financial place to be able to absorb that type of investment. Now, once you figure out where on the spectrum you want to be, like time for money, now I think you can use this criteria here, skills, value, and availability, to really start refining down what side hustle specifically will be appropriate for you. So what I mean by skills is, what skills do you have? How does that translate to value to the marketplace? And then how much time do you have to dedicate to your side hustles? For example, here, like I said, my wife is a teacher and she obviously likes teaching. Students need extra help to get ahead with their schoolwork or to get prepped for college or whatever it is. And she has a couple hours each week to apply to this. So she tutors for $50 an hour. So that's why I use that example. But let's say you have really good technological skills, and you're good with online work. There's a demand for virtual assistants. And a lot of these can be work whenever you want, maybe a few hours a week, maybe a few days a week. And virtual assistants often get paid about $15 an hour. Going through this exercise can help you identify maybe some side hustle jobs or side hustle opportunities that might be really perfect for you. Now, I want to get into some of my favorite side hustles. I think it's really interesting to take a look and see what is out there.
And now it's easier than ever to earn extra money thanks to the rise of the gig economy. Starting can be as easy as downloading an app. Obviously, I can't get into every opportunity here, but I wanted to give you some real examples so that it might inspire an idea for you. One of my friends assembles furniture for people at their homes. He lists his services on Thumbtack and can do 3 to 4 jobs a day. Thanks to the popularity of places like IKEA, he has transitioned from a side hustle to a full-time assembler. Another friend of mine delivers food via a food delivery app on her way home from work. Since the dinner rush starts right as she's ending her workday, she adds a little time to her commute and can earn up to $50 an hour. Her best tip? Wait for the busy time so that the apps pay extra bounties. Then go to a popular place like Chipotle so you can pick up 3 orders at once. Another friend of mine does painting parties. She cuts plywood into squares, brings easels and paints, and maybe most importantly, a case of wine that she also sells on commission to a person's home and has a painting party. As a talented artist herself, she walks a group of eager people through basic painting classes. The participants pay a fee that yields her a nice income, and she advertises on local apps and drums up interest through her Facebook posts. Of course, people need sitters too. My friend has registered with a website where she's a vetted and highly recommended babysitter, specifically for infants, but not exclusively for infants. She works full-time, but then spends a weekend day or evening babysitting kids. Her lowest rate is $20 an hour for the older children, and it goes up to $35 an hour for newborns. My neighbor's kid is also off to a good start learning about business. A couple of years ago, I was using a lawn care service to mow my lawn each week. I have a decent-sized lawn, and so $70 a week was the going rate in my area. This past spring, he asked if he could mow my lawn for $40 a week. It was a deal that I couldn't pass up, and neither could 3 of our neighbors. So, now on Saturdays from 8 a.m. to noon, he's mowing lawns and making about $40 an hour.
You might be familiar with this company, Lime Scooters. They actually have a program for side hustlers called Juicers, but there are a lot of scooter companies out there. If you live in a big urban environment, you've probably seen these things all over the streets. But basically what these electric scooters do is people rent them, they have a battery, and at the end of the day, they need to be recharged. And so Lime Juicers, at the end of the day on their app, will get to the location of scooters that need to be charged, and they will put a bounty on them saying, hey, we'll pay you $10, $15, $20 to charge up that scooter. So you drive around. I've talked to guys who drive around, find them on the map, throw them in their car, take them home, plug them in. And then in the next morning, once they're charged up, it'll show on the map where the scooters are needed. And so you'll drive around and drop them off. And so you can make probably about $14 or $15 an hour doing this. The other one is a guy named Brian Winch has a really innovative company here. It's called Clean Lots. And it's interesting how he built this company. When you go to a strip mall or an office building, who cleans up the parking lots? The tenants think that the landlord cleans it up. The landlord thinks the landscaping crew cleans it up, and the landscaping crew thinks the tenants clean it up. In fact, no one really picks up litter or cleans up parking lots in particular. And Brian discovered this accidentally because he was walking around, getting some exercise, picking up litter and throwing it in dumpsters. And then he approached the real estate company and said, hey, I've noticed you always have this trash. I'm picking it up. Would you hire me to do it? And he found out that those real estate companies are willing to pay $50 an hour to make sure that their parking lots are clean. And he has been building a business. And in fact, he's hiring people to do it. He's trained on his website on how to find business in your area. And I think the last interview I heard from him, he was making about $500,000 a year doing this. So it's pretty amazing. The other thing, another real person here, May Najafabadi, I'll probably get that wrong, runs a company called Creative Kids Crafts. This is innovative because when you think about schools, they generally get out pretty early, around maybe 3 o'clock. But the end of the workday for most people is about 5 o'clock. So there's this gap when kids get done with school and parents are available to say, pick them up a couple hours. I think that's one of the reasons why after school programs are so popular, or sports or whatever it is. And so May realized that a lot of schools, a lot of districts wanted to offer more and more after school activities. And so she created a craft program that lasts 2 or 3 weeks every day after school from 3 to 5. And it's pretty expensive. It's a few $100s to enroll your kid in it for that few weeks. But then she comes up with these craft projects. It really keeps the kids entertained, and then they can take them home. And not only was there so much demand for the school she was doing it in, but she started doing it in other schools, other districts. And now she sells her plans to people who want to deploy this in their local school districts. And she says, if you want to go every day after school and organize these craft activities, you'll average about $200 an hour doing it. And then if you want to hire someone to do it, you can even make more money. It's pretty awesome little product there. And she's really doing some other interesting things for lower income kids too. Really great creative stuff for side hustles. And then another one of my favorites here, Mark Wills runs a company called the Loan Signing System. I don't know if you've ever heard of a loan signing agent. I didn't know that it existed specifically until I saw the information about this class that he runs. But basically, when you get a mortgage, most states require like a third-party independent notary to verify that all the signatures are legitimate, that all the right documents are being signed. And so they will pay generally $100 a closing or about $100 an hour to make sure and supervise that the documents are signed appropriately. So it's like Uber for notaries. And so he teaches you how to, one, do it, get registered, become a notary, but then also how to get into the systems that put out these jobs out there, because a lot of these closings will just list, hey, I need someone at 5 o'clock on this day, and anyone who's available can take it. They don't really care as long as you're licensed to do it. It's really interesting. It's one of those things that you can do as much or as little in some cases. It's really dependent on the real estate market in most areas. Right now could be a really great opportunity, but it might not last forever either. The other thing I want to point out here is that I think there's really a growing need for guidance. So here's an interesting stat that I found. 25% of people are extremely or very likely to pick up their first side hustle this year. So first of all, without selling them on it, without pushing them on it, without even having to go through a discovery process on it. A quarter of Americans are thinking about it or very likely to do it already. I would say if we're in a business of sales, I heard that 25% of people want to do it. Man, I would love to be in that business. I think people are coming in already primed. People that are coming in asking for help on their budgets, people that are coming in to have a financial discussion already maybe have that seed of, I would be willing or eager to do this, and I'm looking for some guidance. I'm going to give you a couple resources that I think are some of probably the best resources for it. First of all, there are a number of side hustle podcasts out there. One of my favorite is called The Side Hustle Show, and they interview people who are doing side hustles. So you get not only an understanding of what that side hustle entails, but really what it entails on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, as well as how much money you can make. And you get really great insights over the course of 30, 40, 50 minutes on one particular side hustle. So it's a really great way to find out about specific side hustles. The other thing I would throw out there too are YouTube videos. Again, there are more and more of these coming up every day. But if you want to know what it's like to drive for Uber or for Lyft, or to shop for Instacart, or to deliver for Amazon, there are a ton of videos of people doing it, sharing real experience, as opposed to just reading something that kind of explains it, or going to the website for Amazon Delivery Associates and just reading what it does. They'll tell you the things like taking into account traffic and how big your car is and weather and all of these things and how much you really get paid. So I think those are really awesome resources. Here are a few of my other favorite podcasts: Side Hustle Nation, Side Hustle School, as well as Grit and Hustle. You can subscribe to them all. You can subscribe to one. I don't think you need to absorb every episode of everything, but if there are some that look really interesting to you, I would recommend you dive into it, listen to it. I think they're really fascinating. And it can be as simple as pulling up YouTube, typing in how much money will you make as an Uber driver, or how much money will you make as an Instacart shopper? What does working for TaskRabbit look like? Whatever it is. And then what it does here is it reinvents the whole budget process that we go through. So if we're stressed and we go through the budget worksheet and go through that exercise, we can look for that low-hanging fruit on expense cutting. But if we switch over to the income side of the discussion, I think the side hustle opportunity is really the low-hanging fruit there. And then we can use the side hustle spectrum to identify, hey, what place are you at in life? Do you need money now? Do you need to fix your budget right now? Then let's look at time for money. But do you have some flexibility? Are you stable? Maybe you're already in surplus. Maybe you're looking for just a creative outlet. Maybe let's look at the variable compensation of the income building options. And then let's look at the skills, the value that provides to the marketplace, and how much time they have. Those are big things. If they have time every day in the evenings, that may be one kind of side hustle. If they have just a Saturday or just Sundays, or maybe just a few hours on the weekend, right? Then we can help identify really specific ones that are worth looking at. I don't want people to look at driving for Uber if on Saturday they end up having to go pick up kids and then be somewhere else and they can only do half an hour here and there. It just might not work. So we want to find the right side hustle. A lot of people just don't know where to start, don't know how to think about it. And I bring all this up because there is a legitimate sense of urgency to looking at side hustles. I have been in a number of conversations where people's numbers don't add up. And I've said, hey, maybe we need to look at the income side. And they said, you've thought about that, but if it really gets bad, I'll do it. And my problem with that is that the getting is good right now in side hustles. It will not always be. For example, if you think that Uber driving is always going to be available, it might. I think ride sharing is on the ascendancy. But if you think that companies aren't trying to get rid of human drivers with autonomous cars, or if you think that the number of Uber drivers out there will always be steady, I think you're wrong. I think if things slow down in the economy, more people are going to go out and be Uber drivers. That's going to push the amount of money that you can earn down. And so if you're waiting to the point where you have to do this, I think you might find that there are a lot of people that are also waiting, and then suddenly it's going to be a crowded space. And the point here is that I think there's a side hustle land grab. I think there is a big advantage for the people who are interested in doing something right now, today, by this weekend, over the people that are going to wait. So let me use an example here. If you are going to walk dogs and you think that you might want to do that, or it's on your radar, why not start today? Why not get 3-4 clients right now? Because I tell you what, when the next recession hits and everyone says, hey, I need to earn some extra money and I want to walk dogs, do you think those 4 or 5 people will switch to another dog walker? They'll probably stick with you, assuming that you're still cost competitive. People like sticking with people they trust. And so because you started earlier, because you established a relationship, because you made fans, clients, powerful relationships with your customers, I think they will stick with you. And the rest of the people that are coming in late who need the income will be fighting for what's left. And so I think starting early is going to really be a big benefit. And like I said, full disclosure, it really changed my life. So for me and my wife, we were just managing things. I would say we both are employed. We're probably the typical family that you think is doing okay. And I would say we were, but I was constantly a tinkerer. We were covering our bills. We were maybe paying off a little debt. We probably didn't have as much savings. We certainly weren't focused on retirement. And I can tell you what, we weren't doing anything related to our dreams. And we were a little stressed. And so we went through the exercise of downsizing. I actually bought a Fiat 500 when they first came out, really downsized cars, downsized home. And I was a constant tinkerer. I'll tell you what, I tried. I felt like every side hustle was available. And it's an exaggeration, but man, I valeted cars. I worked in a call center during the night shift. I sold things online. I did virtual work. I've tried just a ton of stuff. One of the things that I got involved in pretty early too was YouTube. And so I was doing that. And that was one that really exploded. It's really the only side hustle I have now. But YouTube for me over the years has blossomed into a side hustle that is really life-changing for me and my wife. And so it's allowed us not only to experience things that we would have never been able to experience, afford things we would never be able to afford. It's just really changed our lives on a regular day-to-day basis. And I'm not saying that it's like some of the big YouTubers out there that you see that are just smashing it. We're right in the middle. But I tell you what, when we used to have maybe a couple $100s of discretionary income at the end of the month, to go from a couple $100s to a couple $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars in discretionary income, it was massively life-changing for us and the opportunities we had. And the point I'm trying to make on this, and I'm not trying to brag about it, I'm not trying to impress you, I just want to impress upon you that we had no idea where this would go for us. And we were trying a lot of different things. It wasn't like there was strategy and goal setting with it. But the point here is don't give up on some of these things. You just don't know what's going to happen. And on top of that, I think you might find your success and your stride in the most unlikely of places. And it might take a few missteps to get there. It might take 4 or 5 side hustles that you just hate. Don't give up on it because you hate it. And that's the beauty of side hustles, is that if it's not right for you, you can get rid of it. It's much easier than a full-time job. So you can just pivot away from it and try something new. So those are really the powerful things about side hustles. So getting ahead financially, what does it take to get from paycheck to paycheck rung on that financial ladder to the stable rung? Like I said, I think there's a huge mentality difference. How much money does it really take to move from stressed out to serenity? And here's an interesting statistic. According to the National Poverty Center, 1.5 million households' daily net income is less than $2. That means there are millions of households that at the end of the month, whether it's one person in the household working or 2 or whatever it is, they have less than $60 to show for all their effort. And in fact, maybe a lot less. We know that 78% of America is living paycheck to paycheck. So let me just say this, maybe millions of households, after putting in tons of work, working a full-time job, slaving away at things, come away saying, hey, I did all this work, I paid my bills, and at the end of the day, I have $50 to show for all this work. So my question to you is, how much money would be life-changing if every month you worked and had $50 to show for it? If I gave you another $50, would that be life-changing? If I told you that I would give you $50 a month forever, would that be life-changing? What if it were $100 or $200? What if it were $600? Someone goes from having a surplus of $50 to a surplus of $600 a month, I think can be very life-changing. And remember those numbers that we showed about the modal amount of side hustle income and the average amount of side hustle income? $200, even on the modal side, would be, I think, huge. $580 a month, I think would be life-changing for a lot of these people. So you don't have to be internet billionaire to feel the change in mentality, to feel that life-changing moment. The side hustle, I think, can really move people across this threshold. And I think it's just that mentality piece that is maybe the most value. 70% of people are unhappy in their job, right? Maybe because they're not getting heard, their ideas are being ignored. Maybe it's they're not making enough money. Maybe they're not getting promoted. But I tell you what, when you go out and you put in your own effort and you get rewarded for it, i.e. paid for it, you get to see exactly what your outputs create. And I think that can be really rewarding so that you don't feel bottled up. You don't feel confined. I think a lot of people are defined by their job, but there are a lot of people who are confined by their job too. They think that's the limit of their value. It's the limit of their earning potential. It's maybe the limit of their skill set. And I don't think that's true. And I think exploring a side hustle and doing a side hustle can show you how much potential you have. And for a lot of people, it is truly limitless. And it's really not about the money. I think it's about having that creative outlet. 45% of people who side hustle say they would do it regardless of the money. And here's the warning. If you get later in life, for people who are retired, 76% of those people say they had regrets. Specifically, they didn't fulfill their ideal self. And my theory on that is that a lot of people just keep deferring things that they want to do in life, often because of the finances, saying, hey, I can't afford that now. I'll wait till I do it. I won't buy my dream car, my dream home. I won't go on that dream vacation. I won't spend time with a friend or meet up someone for dinner because I just don't have the finances right now. I think if we can start plugging the hole in that finances, the number of regrets will start to fall later in life. And the last piece, and really the big piece of this, and the thing I want to think about, is growing the pie. So when we look at our income and we slice it up and we say, hey, this is going to cable, this is going to food, and this is going to clothing. If we need more for school or tuition, the slices of pie in those other areas have to get smaller. And I think what a lot of people find is that over time, those pie slices start getting really thin. So instead of trying to be really creative of how we slice the pie, maybe we should just think about growing the pie. And what is our end game? For the people that are getting by, I think we are trying to get ahead, get them out of paycheck to paycheck, pay down the debt, help address job insecurity, or lower their financial stress. A lot of people have relationship and well-being problems. What is the number one reason for divorce in America? It's financial stress. So getting people from there to getting them ahead, I think means we're paying down debt, we're avoiding debt, or even the need to take out debt. We're maybe saving relationships. Maybe we start disrupting the debt counseling industry, the debt settlement, maybe bankruptcy. We can help people avoid all of those things. Give them a creative outlet, let them fulfill their own needs, help them pursue and live their values, maybe build wealth, find joy in life. For some of you that are maybe familiar with the financial independence movement, I think the idea that someone can do whatever they want in life is really the ultimate goal. A lot of us think of that as retirement. Some of us want to think about just being financially independent, whatever that means. We want to get out of the point of being stressed out, being in the space where it's mentally constraining, and out of the mentality of scarcity and move to abundance. And the nice thing about this is side hustles can help check the boxes on all of these. So I think that's why side hustles are so powerful. So side hustles, I think they're powerful. They help us achieve freedom. I hope some of the ideas that I provided here are something that you might be able to use, maybe just at a personal level. Maybe you want to pursue a side hustle. Maybe you're going to help people rethink their financial strategy with side hustles. So I hope it's really useful for you.